everyone, welcome back to BenchyTests. Today, Intel's Xeon line of CPUs is usually associated with high core count processors aimed purely at the server market. Apart from the 28-core W3175X, which is aimed at consumers. That said though, in the past, a lot of, if not all, of Intel's Xeon CPUs were actually based on their consumer counterparts. A good example being the that's not a 3175X. The X5260 Xeon we have here today. Now, this is literally the exact same CPU as the Core 2 Duo E8600. Same specs and everything, just with the addition of support for ECC server RAM and also the ability to run two of these in a dual socket 771 motherboard. But speaking of specs, let's take a deeper dive into the specs and see what's actually under the hood of the 5260/E8600.
Running at 3.3 GHz with a 1333 MHz frontside bus speed, the X5260 has two cores with no hyperthreading and supports socket 771 motherboards. It is based on the same Wolfdale architecture the E8600 uses and features the same 410 million transistors as well, built on the 45nm fabrication process. As mentioned, it supports ECC server grade RAM, but also supports the 8GB of DDR2 we're using here today, as well as DDR3 memory as well. There's 64KB of L1 cache per core, and 6MB of L2 cache shared between the cores. Another addition over the E8600, well, less an addition, more something they disabled on the E8600, is the ability to run two of these together, assuming you actually have a dual socket server motherboard.
Before we actually get on with the benchmarks, there's a few things we have to go over before we actually do that. First is that by default you can't just go put a socket 771 compatible Xeon into a 775 board and expect it to work. It's literally impossible. So what you actually have to do is, not sure if you'll be able to see it, I'll put something up there if you can, but there's a little sticker right there, and what that does is it swaps around two of the pins on the back of the processor, enabling it to be used in compatible 775 motherboards. Another issue is that the little plastic tabs inside the 775 socket that stop you from installing the processor in an incorrect position, they're in the wrong place for 771 Xeons. So, as you may or may not be able to see, there's a little indent in the CPU there, and another one there. So they actually need to be on the other side of the processor, and if you can see this alright, what you might be able to see already is that this Xeon has an indent there and there. That's not meant to be there. What happened was, the AliExpress seller that we bought this from literally drilled into the processor. They drilled into the bloody processor. Ah! Why? Why would you do that? It works, by the way. Just saying. It actually works. There's nothing wrong with the processor, it works fine. And to be perfectly honest, it's most likely what I'm going to be doing to the Xeons I've got left to benchmark. But anyway, let's get on with the benchmarks.
With Cinebench R20, we ran the benchmark 3 times and averaged out the scores, as run to run, Cinebench's scores can vary. The X5260, after its 3 respective runs, averaged 396.33 points, only 2.3% down on the overclocked Core 2 Duo E8300. Overclocked though, the X5260 is an absolute machine. Over 4 GHz is possible on stock voltage. Our example topped out at 4.5 GHz with 1.376 to 1.392 volts, putting the RAM at 900 MHz due to the increase in frontside bus speed. And with the overclock came a 36.42% increase in score, from 396.33 up to 540.67 points, putting it only 5.97% down on the stock clocked quad-core Core 2 Quad Q8300. And after discussing Blender a little a few videos back, we decided to introduce it to our suite of benchmarks. The Fishy cutscene, which we're going to be using in our CPU benchmarks as a free to download demo for use with Blender, created by Manu Jarvinen, whose name I probably butchered, sorry. This won't be representative of more complex animations, but should give you a good idea of what rendering basic animations might be like. For the benchmark, we've set it to render a single frame, recording the time it takes to do so from start to finish. We're doing this a total of 3 times and averaged out the time for the final result. The X5260 finished the scene in an average of 3 minutes 41.53 seconds. There are no comparisons here other than the Ryzen 2700 in our editing / GPU test rig, as we've yet to actually test any other CPUs in Blender so far. Overclock though, the Xeon saw a decrease in time required to render the frame of 24.57%, with a time of 2 minutes 47.1 seconds. 47.93 seconds it took the 2700 to complete it though, shows just what a modern day CPU can do in tile-based rendering scenarios like when using Blender. First up for games is Crysis, at 1080p with the lowest settings in DirectX 10 mode, which to our surprise ran relatively well, until the latter third of the test that is, where it started to exhibit some very noticeable stuttering. The rest of the game though had some spikes in its frame times up to 52 milliseconds, with 3 spikes in particular of 68 to 133 milliseconds, although we didn't even notice these when they happened. Stuttering in the latter third puts a dampener on the performance the X5260 showed earlier in the test. The 5260 managed average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates of 103.5, 27 and 11.5 FPS respectively according to CapFrameX, which we now use to get our benchmark figures. That 0.1% low indicating the micro stutter we saw. With the overclock, which had to be turned down to 4.4 GHz for stability reasons, putting the RAM at 880 MHz, the stuttering we saw in the latter third of the test was massively reduced. It was still noticeable but was far better in stock. And apart from one minor stutter near the start, it performed great and is definitely playable. The figures show how big an improvement was made, with 122.6, 55.1 and 23.1 FPS for its average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively, equating to 18.45, 48.92 and 100.87% improvements respectively over what stock clocks managed. GTA 5 tends to need at least a quad core to run well, and that hasn't changed here. We used a mix of high and normal settings with 16x anisotropic filtering at 1080p. There was very noticeable micro stuttering throughout the city, which was true for the rest of the game as well. FPS did get into the high 30s at times but could drop under 20. The stuttering reduced a bit when driving on the highway heading out towards the desert area, but was still apparent there, with the desert area itself showing the same stuttering we saw in the city. Overall, the game can be playable, but it certainly isn't comfortable here at all. At stock, the 5260 managed 34.2, 14.2 and 9.6 FPS for average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. And as you can see, overall, the 4.4 GHz overclock in the game actually worsened performance. We didn't retest the overclock, but this could likely be down to the overclock being unstable, but stable enough to not crash completely. There was a slight improvement in averages, but overall no improvement came from the overclock at all. CSGO at 1080p with medium settings and 16x anisotropic filtering and a hard difficulty competitive bot match on the Mirage map ran great in some parts but had some quite noticeable stuttering in others. It was especially noticeable in the first round where there were significant problems when close combat happened, but it lessened in the rounds afterwards. There wasn't any input lag we noticed, and overall the game was still in fact playable. Despite the issues, the 5260 managed an average of 71.7 FPS, with 1% and 0.1% lows of 33.5 and 14.7 FPS respectively, the 0.1% low again being an indication of the stuttering we saw. CSGO was stable with up to 4.4 GHz as well, and like Crysis saw a huge improvement in performance. The 5260 could now manage 91.4, 42.3 and 19.5 FPS for average 1% and 0.1% lows respectively. There was still stuttering throughout as indicated by the 0.1% low, but the game actually ran great throughout to our eyes, apart from some noticeable stuttering in the first round which, like previously, sorted itself out from round 2 onwards. In Rise of the Tomb Raider at 1080p, we've used a custom medium preset with the exact settings used in the chart coming up in a moment. As is normal with such a relatively underpowered CPU, loading times were atrocious, and at the start of the test, FPS dipped into the low 20s. Overall, the game ran surprisingly well though. Well, better than expected at least, despite the moments of very noticeable stuttering throughout. The game also dipped into the single figures FPS wise at times, but surprisingly ran relatively smooth in parts of the Soviet installation and well, awful on others. There was slight texture popping at the wolf den, which again is normal for something as underpowered as this. There was also a scripted sequence when Lara is running from a chasing helicopter, which failed to start in time, causing you to fall to your death, which was convenient. The copper mill also saw a lot of stutter as well. Overall, the frame times were really inconsistent. The 5260 at stock clocks managed 38.2, 8.1 and an awful 3.6 FPS for its average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively. It had some really bad spikes in frame times as well, with some around the 128 to 308 milliseconds mark, and the worst of just over a second. The 5260 couldn't manage 4.4 GHz in Rise of the Tomb Raider, but 4.35 GHz was fine. And with that overclock, the figures may not show much of an improvement at 42.5, 9.8 and 5.7 FPS for average 1% and 0.1% low frame rates respectively, but there was a substantial improvement in some parts in terms of the level of stutter being reduced. The game also still had trouble with the same scripted sequence it stock did. FPS in the Soviet installation could dip as low as 15 with very noticeable stutter at points, and gameplay can still be difficult due to the performance as well. The copper mill though ran surprisingly well, but also still had some micro stuttering remaining. Overall, the severity of the stutter had definitely reduced compared to stock clocks, it just couldn't really make a difference on the terms of playability. Power draw is where it starts to get a little bit scary. The stock clocks in Cinebench R20 at X5260 pulls 45.35 watts, plus or minus 3%, putting it right between the triple core Phenom X3710 and the Pentium E5700 with a near 4 GHz overclock. The X5260 itself overclocked however, the power draw skyrockets a massive 142.43% over stock, with 109.94 watts plus or minus 3%. This is only 12.1% down on the 3.9 GHz overclocked Phenom X3710. Blender also shows a massive increase in power draw after overclock as well, pulling an effectively equal to Cinebench amount of power at stock of 45.85 watts plus or minus 3%, which shoots up to 112.44 watts plus or minus 3%, a massive 145.23% more power than stock pulls.
Overall, the 5260 actually really impressed us here. Cinebench R20 for example, with the 4.5 GHz overclock, it was matching or almost matching a stock Core 2 Quad Q8300. Granted that can also be overclocked, but the fact that a dual core Xeon even came close to matching a quad core Core 2 Quad CPU is insane. The games themselves though, CSGO and Crysis, those are the kinds of games you want to be aiming for if you have a processor of this era. Sort of games like GT5 and Rise of the Tomb Raider, strictly speaking they are playable, but as you saw they have a lot of problems and the overclock makes little to no difference whatsoever. Granted, the overclock in GT5 may have been a bit unstable, leading to lower performance than stock clocks, but yeah, you're not going to be getting much more performance out of GT5 and Rise of the Tomb Raider with an overclock. Speaking of the overclock, that was probably the most impressive part of the 5260. At stock it runs at 3.3 GHz, and in Cinebench we managed 4.5 and Blender as well, and that's 1.2 GHz over stock, which is, like by today's standards, is a hell of a lot. It's not particularly special going by what other processors of the era were able to manage, because they could manage some quite substantial overclocks too. But we were approaching 4.2, maybe 4.3 GHz on stock voltage before we actually had to start increasing it, which is insane.
Before we finish up today, I'd like to give shoutouts to Patreon supporters TazFaeDodge and ShadowInTheVoid for helping to make all of this possible. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more content like this, and share the video as well with people you think may enjoy it. And there's no obligation to do this, but you can support us in creating these videos through our Patreon at patreon.com/BenchyTests, or through Ko-fi at ko-fi.com/BenchyTests, and Ko-fi has a hyphen between the KO and FI. And if you decide to become a patron, you'll gain early access to all of our videos for as long as you remain a patron. So thanks for watching the video today, It means a lot to us that you would take the time to watch our content. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, just a quick little thing before the end. With everything that's going on in the world right now, the absolute last thing people need is for people disobeying the rules, the guidance, disobeying the lockdown in the UK or any lockdowns in their respective countries. So be a good person, stay indoors, save lives, alright? You might not be concerned about getting coronavirus or COVID-19, but for God's sake, every single time you go out and disobey the lockdown or disobey your country's rules about staying indoors, you are putting every single person you come into contact with at risk. You might be fine, but those other people might not be. Stay indoors and save lives.